What's going on, guys, and welcome to another episode. Today I'm joined by Ed, a YouTuber, founder of Vinwiki, a Cannonball record holder from 2013 to 2019, a CarTrek presenter, and the exotic car enthusiast. So welcome, Ed.
Thanks so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Thanks for being part of this episode, so I appreciate that. So, for the people that don't know you, and I don't think there isn't a lot of people that don't, can you just tell sort of the viewers and listeners a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. Long-term car enthusiast, especially exotic cars, supercars, things like that. I had an exotic car rental company for a bit, also was the director of sales at Lamborghini Atlanta, and left that back in 2015. Not sure what was next. We launched an app called Vinwiki. That's a way to document vehicle history. Anybody can post information to a car by its VIN or by its license plate, and we've had a lot of fun with that. Then we started a YouTube channel about a year later, that would have been the summer of 2017, to promote the app, and that's really grown a lot. So that sort of cart driving the horse became my day-to-day job, and it's been a whole lot of fun. We've spun that into some other show concepts, including CarTrek. And we're currently releasing our 8th kind of challenge, which is, very much a Top Gear knockoff, but it was a situation where we had a sponsor that was open to some content, and we proposed exactly what any car enthusiast, I think, would propose. Let us play Top Gear.
Yeah, I've sort of been following the CarTrek there, and obviously I've seen the second episode of the 8th series, and I must say, you guys are just getting better and better with every single series that you do.
Thanks so much. I appreciate that a lot.
Great choice on the Bentley, by the way. It's just one of those cars that, it does drink a lot of petrol, as they say in here. But yeah, it's one of the amazing cars actually for what the price that even you pay, even here in the UK. Hell of a lot of car.
They're wonderful. I'd always wanted a Bentley, and so for this series I found a 2010 Super Sports that had 180,000 miles on it, so the highest I'd ever seen one have, but it was a 2+0 with the Bugatti seats and ceramic brakes and everything. It was wonderful. I had a blast in it.
So just tell me, so when did the passion sort of for cars started for you?
So I didn't grow up in a car-loving family. I fell in love with cars when I could start to drive them. And I used to go around to every dealership in town and try to con them into test drives at 16, 17, 18 years old. And just, obviously read every car magazine, watched every car show, just tried to absorb as much of the knowledge as I possibly could and try to figure out how I road mapped my life towards being able to own them and drive more of them.
Obviously, from having the rental company when you were in college, I think you went to Georgia Tech, haven't you?
I did, yes.
That must have been really, really hard to get a loan on the Lamborghini, wasn't it? Obviously, back in those previous times, obviously the sort of the financial market and how easy it was slightly a little bit different, but still must have been a pretty bit of a challenge.
It was, but at the same time, this would have been in 2006, and so that was sort of the time frame that precipitated the economic downturn of 2008 and 9. And so banks were a lot more lenient. You could do stated income loans for cars in the U.S., even really long-term ones. I had loans up to 180 months, so 15 years on some of these exotic cars. And so I didn't have the cash to make the payments apart from hopefully getting them rented out. Unfortunately, the business was somewhat successful, and we had an awful lot of fun and came out with a lot of stories to tell.
So, just a question, sort of, in terms of like ownership of the supercars, obviously there is this sort of stigma going on in terms of the sort of money pits. Can you sort of elaborate on that? Do you think that's true or not?
So certainly there are a lot of exotic cars that have the reputation of being money pits, that they can be exceptionally expensive to fix, to maintain, servicing, parts, all the things. And there's a lot of truth there. I mean, the cars are expensive. Fortunately, over the last at least 18 months and generally over the last decade, we've seen a fairly consistent appreciation in the values of rare and exotic cars. And so generally, you can offset a lot of the carrying costs with the cars just going up in value, which is super, super cool. And so I've been able to not necessarily like flip through cars for the sake of owning them for profit, but being able to buy the cars that I really wanted and, sell them in favorable ways. And so that's been a big part of my personal financial journey. And I've ended up owning some really cool cars.
So currently, if you can obviously share with us, how many cars do you currently have, and what sort of?
How many do I have right now? Probably like 12 or 13 at the moment. I've got 3 Murciélagos. I've got a manual LP640 Coupe and LP640 Roadster, and then I have an E-Gear SV. So the Mercy's been my favorite car since it came out in 2001, setting all the world speed records. I think it's just the most beautiful car Lamborghini ever made. Simplistic design, elegant, wonderful, and everything that an outrageous supercar needs to be. I've got an Audi R8 that's going to be the next CarTrek car, as well as a 6-wheeled Range Rover, which is going to be another CarTrek car. What have I got? I sold the 430 Scuderia recently. I've got a Porsche Cayenne, a couple AMG cars that we set the records in for Cannonball. My wife drives a GL63, so I'm sure I'm missing a few, but that's the highlights. Oh, I have a Spiker at the moment too. I'm not delivered yet.
Cool.
I just bought it from Missy Elliott.
Are you going to have a nice car story ready for all of us to watch?
Absolutely, unless Sylvester Stallone talks me into selling it to him, which is currently in process. So if it makes it into my garage, we'll certainly have a great story to tell.
So just going slightly a little bit back, obviously you come from sort of a car selling background, right? So can you just tell us, so how hard is it to sell your first sort of supercar?
Well, there's very little training in the world of exotic car sales, even in a dealership setting. And so it's not that much different in practice than selling a Honda or a Toyota. But at the same time, there's different considerations, and the ways that you qualify customers as a salesperson are quite different. I mean, you're going to waste a lot of time if you don't get to the more financial aspects of the transaction, at least in the narrative form, early in the discussion. And so it takes a lot, especially as we've got such a diverse offering of modern supercars, to really identify what the right car is for someone. They'll have read something or seen something and they've decided that this might be the car they want. And sometimes it's easy enough just to help them with that. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you're, putting them in something that they're actually going to enjoy and that they can eventually get out of to move into whatever's next.
The Vinwiki channel, and how it sort of grew and where you currently are. Can you just sort of give us a little snippet how it sort of, the whole idea started?
Well, the idea started that Vinwiki YouTube video, a Vinwiki car story, is essentially a blown up version of what would belong as a post or a series of posts in the Vinwiki app. And the ways that we connect with cars and the stories that we create with them really do add to the value, the experience, and the understanding of what a car is. And so we wanted to build a way to sort of, in a long form, illustrate how that might look. And literally it began just me and my friends sitting around in my warehouse telling our best car stories with some pizza and beer. I never ever imagined it would grow to have its own audience or generate revenue or have sponsor deals or anything that's happened since then. That was all just really a series of happy accidents.
Your YouTube channel, I've actually checked before, obviously we started this. You're currently sitting on 552 million views in a space of how many years? So how many years have you had the Vinwiki YouTube channel for now?
I think last week it was 5 years.
Oh wow! We're looking at about 100 million more every year, which is incredible, isn't it? And with the vast sort of diverse group of individuals that you sort of put into every single episode, because there's different sort of people and different sort of stories. It's nice for a viewer like myself, and obviously watching it every single potentially a day, every single week. It's incredible how the channel has grown, how many there are different stories that people have sort of encountered and sort of things that have happened to them. It's incredible. So from me, just want to say it's great. Like, I hope your channel obviously grows even bigger in the space of sort of next 5 years,
Well, thank you so much. That means a lot. And the honest privilege and honor of the whole thing is seeing so many amazing stories from other people that get immortalized into the playlist, and they get exposed to so many more people than we could ever meet just talking about them at a car show or in a bar or something like that.
So again, just looking at obviously your car rental sort of situation, can you just tell the viewers and the listeners the weirdest car rental stories you got?
Oh my goodness. Well, the week of my wedding, I had kind of blocked everything off so that starting on about Wednesday, everything would be in, that we wouldn't have any cars out, just because there weren't going to be enough resources there to manage it. But I had a repeat customer. He'd rented several cars several times. He rented for him and an out-of-town visitor friend, and he was actually a former Atlanta police officer. He rented my Gallardo and a Ferrari 612 Scaglietti. And about, I don't know, Monday, he stopped answering my phone calls, and he'd sort of extended the rental in cash a couple of times already. And I told him, look, by Wednesday, you just have to have the car back, both of them. And so that night, I found the Gallardo with the nose knocked off of it somewhere midtown Atlanta. And the tracking device had stopped working on the 612 because the car had been left the ignition on too long, and it just ate the battery and its internal capacitance. Yeah. And so we start looking all over town. People are seeing it show up after they would jump it off, drive it a little ways. It'd be in some valet, and then they go back home. And it turned out that this customer had sold the car, the 612, and thought that I might actually like that he felt like he'd gotten a good deal. He had taken $15,000 in cash in a BMW 7 Series as a partial trade and down payment. And as I eventually learned, as I got a call from this guy's wife, the person who had bought the car, his name was Lucky. That's all my customer knew. Yeah. His wife claimed to be a lawyer, but didn't know much about the law. And in that circumstance in the U.S., it's not like your normal Grand Theft Auto car theft situation. It is it's called theft by conversion. Like, this person had permission to use the car, they just then used it in a way they weren't allowed to do. And so that doesn't constitute the same level of crime as normal auto theft, and it's what takes most exotic car rental companies out of business today. But eventually, after a long series of negotiations, a bad check being written with the permission of local cops, we did get the car back after my honeymoon, so it was a pretty dramatic time. But yeah, that was a bad one.
In terms of my sort of how I noticed your sort of YouTube channel, I think the first story that I've watched actually was the prostitute Gallardo for $30,000. That for me just is one of those sort of like, wow, we'll never imagine something like that to happen, really.
I wouldn't have either. That was an amazing one, but yeah, that one's been good, and I believe we're going to be able to help her get out of prison next year.
Oh yeah! Oh wow! I didn't know she was still in prison. Jesus.
Yeah. You can't keep doing that, as it turns out.
So Ed, you have a incredible stable of cars, and for the years even before, you've had from S classes to S55s, all sorts of great cars. What are your sort of key principles in buying a car? Sort of what do you look for to buy a car?
Primarily, I avoid depreciation. That's always been my approach, is that when you buy cars that are 8 to 10 years old, in most cases, you're not going to see much depreciation. You may start to see a market upswing. And in the time that I've been buying cars, 10-year-old exotics were already pretty reliable. So these were drivable cars. These are the 360 and newer Ferrari era, the Audi influenced Lamborghinis, stuff like that. So my personal approach to car ownership has always been to look like I won the lottery 10 or 15 years ago.
I suppose that's the way to go, especially with highly depreciated cars and things like that. It's much more affordable and better to obviously to get the cars that we once dreamed about, didn't we, of having.
Exactly, and I also try to buy the worst example of any car, because it's always going to follow the market of that car, but you're cushioning your downside, and it also invites you to improve the car and use the car, both of which add value in that circumstance. And so if you've got a car that's got a haunted past or a really bad history or has been in an accident or has a ton of miles or is a bad spec or anything like that, like, you can always do things to improve it, and that both in reality and in the perception of the audience that might be interested in buying it in the future. And so that's served me quite well.
So in terms of CarTrek and where you guys are sort of currently at, you guys are on the 8th season, and it's incredibly successful. I've seen the comments on every single YouTube video that's being sort of posted onto channel. So just for our listeners and our viewers, I know obviously you sort of mentioned a bit of Top Gear, but the whole CarTrek idea, where did that sort of come from?
It came from me and Freddie sitting around my fire one year when he was on his way around Christmas to drop off the Pimp My Ride van to Tyler Hoover. And it was shortly after I had actually helped Tyler buy a Murcielago Roadster. And I kind of looked at Freddie and I said, why don't we do cheap car challenges? Like, it's a little more production value, it's a little bit more expensive to produce and to do, but we could probably find a sponsor that would be open to it. And we all had a great relationship with Auto Tempest, and they became, kind of the perfect partner. They're a marketplace that allows people to search cars nationwide in the U.S. They're working on expanding to other markets like Europe, but it's a very powerful search tool, and they needed help evangelizing that to the world. And so they were interested in some higher quality, more produced content, and we were interested in doing it. And so we kind of devised the first challenge, which was who could buy the coolest supercar for the price of the new C8 Corvette back in early 2020. And with a Gallardo, a 360, and an Aston Martin V12 Vantage S, we set out on an adventure, and we had no idea what we were doing. We had never produced anything to that level, but the idea of taking a series of ridiculous cars through a series of challenges seemed like a fun and interesting idea, and it's been a whole lot of fun to do since then.
Yeah, I like to remember myself when the first episode of the first season has come out, and I was starting watching it, and I'll be like, it's just a nice sort of a reminder of how back in the day Top Gear sort of used to be. Like with the James May, Jeremy Clarkson, and Richard Hammond, how they sort of connected, because you guys, as obviously three of you guys gel really well in every single sort of episode, and how you sort of present the cars and how you do the challenges. So it was nice from the viewer side of things. It was amazing to see, three YouTube personalities that have, three of them have great YouTube channels that are very interesting and, very sort of, new as such, can bring something that, we used to watch back in the day when I was, a lot younger. So that just is just incredible. And obviously continuing now, a season on, it's just getting better and better.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. It's been a ton of fun. And the great thing about where we were able to begin from was that the audience already generally knew us, at least the audience that we were going to initially expose the content to. And so they knew about Freddie's reputation of believing that he could fix anything and generally following through on that belief. We knew about Tyler's love of hoopty cars and his glutton for punishment that he is in accepting all the issues and things. And, my terribly misguided attempts at shrewdly negotiating my way into some really ridiculous cars with some great stories. And so the fact that the audience already knew that, and we didn't have to build our character to the audience over several seasons to get to know for the audience to get to know us, helped us a lot to kind of hit the ground running and to build a chemistry that I'm glad conveys well, because it's truly genuine. We like each other, we have a lot of fun, and we make when we make fun of each other, it's exactly the same way when the cameras are on. So it's great.
So in terms of all the sort of storyline and how things sort of go, do you guys obviously is it scripted, or sort of the how the cars obviously break down, and like, is that sort of that just happens, or you guys have sort of a script that you follow, or how does that work?
No, the failures of us and the failures of the cars are 100% authentic. We do try to build not a script, but a structure of how we expect the storyline to go. Not once has that survived 24 hours of filming in terms of, staying intact towards an end game, but it helps us to at least know, like, all right, these 4 scenes are probably going to be the primary parts of the second episode. And then inevitably something breaks, like Freddie breaks an axle on the Z06 in the episode that we released, today, the second episode of CarTrek 8. And so I don't know. It's not scripted. We do try to come up with clean ways to integrate the obvious sponsor plugs to Auto Tempest and the Ticket Clinic, our 2 sponsors that make it happen. But no, it's not. We don't sit around writing out exactly how it's going to go. Very occasionally, we'll have a car fail in an unexpected way that doesn't fit into the way that we've constructed the storyline, and we'll manufacture the way that intersects. So that's been a thing that's happened in the past. Is like, well, we blew up a Cadillac once, blew a head gasket, and we did it on the way to dinner. We knew the car was probably going to fail, but we had to then build that into why we were all three driving the car and fit that into the storyline. And I think it worked. People didn't seem to catch it.
No, but I think I remember which season that was. Was that this season, the Christmas one? The white Cadillac that you found?
The Christmas one. So, and anytime you're trying to capture something for, television or YouTube or anything like that, it takes more effort to make sure that you actually have the shots that explain what happened. So there's actually a few shots in that series where Tyler appears to be driving the car and he'll be talking to the camera, but at that point the car's already well incapacitated and it's on a trailer, and he's just being towed around talking to it, just so that we can explain how he got to the point where the car exploded. Otherwise it becomes just a Vinwiki car story where we're sitting in a chair telling the story of what happened without all the footage there to just let the viewer see it.
Yeah. So in terms of sort of the 8th season now, can you sort of give us a little bit more of a sort of a snippet? What's more to come? Because the second episode of the 8th season, it another sort of like, wasn't expecting that to happen really. But is there any more sort of that was sort of will happen, but you can't really see it that will happen?
This series is fun because obviously we're all being, bombarded with the demand for electric automobiles. And so this is the best supercar that we could buy for the price of a Tesla Model 3. And so we've got a Corvette, a Viper, and a Bentley Super Sports. And so we really get into the discussion of, how do we feel as enthusiasts and aging enthusiasts. We're all in our 30s, late 30s perhaps, and just trying to figure out how this all changes the ways that we love cars. And I enjoyed that about the 3rd episode of this series. And then, we continue with 2 more series that we're going to shoot in August. One will be released in October, and one will be released as a Christmas special. And I love the concepts we have there. One is off-roading, one is more supercars. And so it's, we're going to be driving millions and millions of dollars worth of cars around Car Week. So that's going to be a blast. And it's just, creating fun opportunities as often as we can all get together.
To ask you, Ed, engine-powered cars, what are your thoughts sort of on the sort of electric cars, essentially, and the future of them?
I totally understand the allure. I have a golf cart, and I like the way it drives around my neighborhood. It's an electric vehicle that has its purpose, right? But in the final episode, I use an analogy that I've used before. Is like, there's a robot that lives in my house, and when I'm not here, it vacuums my floors. It's my Roomba. And that was obviously invented by somebody who views driving as a chore, right? They didn't want, or views vacuuming as a chore. The problem with an electric car and the way that they're executed on is that they are treating driving as a chore that they want the car to make painless, not experiential at all. And I think that I do view vacuuming as a chore, but I don't view driving as a chore. And so ideologically, I am not the audience for an electric car as currently presented. Now, is something like a Rimac or one of these hypercars that's either hybridized or all electric. Does that make sense? Maybe, I suppose, but honestly, I don't like any of them because I don't like cars that have an expiration date, and batteries are consumable items in cars. And so when it's all battery for propulsion, that terrifies me as to the legitimate long-term prospect of what ownership might look like. Yeah. So if you think about batteries from the perspective of the best way to propel a car forward, to me, that's not it. I love internal combustion. I love my old cars that don't have expiration dates in terms of, how long they're going to last, and that 20, 30, 50, 100 years from now, hopefully somebody's still enjoying them.
I think looking at it, especially here, sort of in the UK, and obviously they're investing a lot of money, but we're just thinking by 2030 here, they're thinking about not producing any more sort of petrol-powered cars, which for some of us is, well, well, for all of us, it's essentially 8 years from now, or let's say 7.5, because we're nearly halfway through the 2022. So yeah, on a scale of obviously here in the UK, that's going to be quite difficult when the infrastructure isn't where it's supposed to be, I feel. Because some of those cars, like obviously you said, they're sort of like a consumable item, isn't it? They're essentially like a phone on wheels, because you do have the battery, but every single 5, I think, to 7 years, those batteries need replacing, isn't it? And it's just, where do we obviously put the batteries when they're finished? How are we going to maintain that? What are we going to do with them? But essentially with the old school way of obviously having a car, brakes, break it down, use the parts for something else. Essentially, that's the idea, but it's a little bit different. And so for the environment as well, when you look at it, it's, well, the electric powered cars are not really saving the environment, are they?
No, they certainly aren't. There are some benefits, certainly, and I can appreciate that. To me, it's not the answer, and I don't think it's actually the long-term answer. There's a part of me that gets sad about the end of the production of gasoline or petrol-powered automobiles. There's also a part of me that absolutely loves it, because I love the ones that are already built, and I don't like having a new dream car come out that I now have to change my goal to. So I still like my old supercars, and there's a lot more of them that I want to own and drive. And so if they stop making new ones, there's going to be plenty of the old ones that I still haven't had a chance to play with yet.
That is a good thought process. I do like that. So moving on, going back, because you are, well, officially a record holder from the 2013 to 2019 of the Cannonball race. So where did the idea sort of came for this? Obviously?
When I was growing up and reading every automotive magazine I could get my hands on, I read a lot in Car and Driver about Cannonball. And the idea of like qualified drivers and really capable cars racing across the country was about the coolest thing I could possibly have heard of. And so obviously saw the films with Burt Reynolds and just fell in love with the idea of that being a reflection of who I wanted to be with respect to the automotive hobby, right? I mean, when you say you love cars, that doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. You may love fixing cars, detailing cars, modifying cars, driving cars, whatever. And to me, the combination of driving skill, endurance, primarily problem solving, car building, everything that culminated in what it would take to theoretically successfully set the Cannonball record seemed like exactly who I wanted to be with respect to the automotive hobby. And so I set out on about a 10-year journey to solve all the problems related to a drive like that. And on our first attempt back in October of 2013, we did it.
Ever since, obviously, you've sort of done it, there have been few attempts, obviously, of the record being sort of broken, and obviously faster times been recorded. My question to you is, before obviously we finish, have you thought about doing it one more time and showing everyone that Ed Bolian still got it?
I was able to do it at exactly the right time in terms of the arc of the history of the modern interpretation of what Cannonball is. Today the records they'll have 40 spotter cars and 800 wheel horsepower monster cars that they've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on. I spent every dollar I had plus everything the credit card would let go on it in order to do it as a 28-year-old, and I got everything I could possibly have wanted and way more out of the experience, the accomplishment, and certainly the following that one could gain from something like that. Today there were 12 teams that beat my time within a 6-week period at the initial onset of COVID. And so to most of the world, we don't even know what the Cannonball record actually is anymore, just because it's gotten so noisy and so contested over the last couple of 3 years. So I've done it 8 times, I think, since then, in like cheaper cars or older cars, not nearly as fast, and had an absolute blast with it. It's an amazing community of people to be connected to, and it's been great to use the Vinwiki platform to let more and more people know about Cannonball, and certainly that's why there have been so many more attempts, as they've seen stuff like this. And so I'm very, very pleased to have been able to sort of leave my mark on it, and really no huge compulsion or temptation to try to beat them all again.
Right, Ed. Obviously, I appreciate your time. Obviously, having this little sort of short podcast. For those of you who want to follow Ed and watch Ed on YouTube, he is on Ed Bolian on YouTube and Vinwiki on YouTube as well. And also, if you're in America, check his Vinwiki app, where you can obviously store the information of all your cars. Once again, thank you very much, Ed, for being part of this podcast.
Thank you for having me. Have a great afternoon.